Right, in today's example in editing, we're going to be doctoring up this pretty classic mountain slash travel scene. You can see two travelers. This is actually me and my wife. We're looking at Annapurna South in Nepal. And yeah, it's a cool photo. It's lined up really quite nicely. Placed the subjects, sort of placed ourselves underneath the peak of that mountain. We've got some nice clouds. We've got some nice foreground. We've got some nice midground, like a good bit of layering. You get bigger snow-capped peaks in the background, but it would be okay as is, but it looks raw. I mean, it is a raw shot, but it just doesn't look finished. Conversely, what we're going to end up doing with this is creating something more like that shot. So you can see the blues come out. We're messing with the shadows, and let's kind of dive in. So in Adobe Camera Raw, we're going to hit enter. If you're in Lightroom, it'd be the same thing. And we're going to open up the editor tool. So you can see here, Photoshop bouncing in the background. And remember, Adobe Camera Raw, which is what I'm using here, is my preferred choice, is basically Lightroom. All these sliders are the exact same. The shortcut tools or buttons or keys that I will be pressing might be a little bit different in Lightroom, but the gist is the same. On that note, always a good idea to download a Lightroom shortcut or Adobe Camera Raw shortcut cheat sheet, more or less, just because it really helps with the editing flow and the speed that you can do things. So, okay, so let's look at some of the basics. We're shot at ISO 100, so a lot of editable capabilities. I think it's always fun just to see what millimeter you're shooting at. You might start to find that, on your zoom lenses, like your 24 to 105, you're shooting a lot at 28 or 35 or 42. And frankly, that might be a good sign to pick up a prime lens in that range, just as a little aside. We're at f9, so definitely good depth of field. And then 1/640 as the shutter speed. So this is definitely worth editing. I think it's always good to look at those just to make sure nothing's weird or botched. Like if this was ISO 12,000, I frankly might edit it differently because I know that it doesn't have as much editable capability. So next step, I do love to start with auto just to see what it does. Auto obviously brightens the shadows. It does a lot of treatment to this foreground, but I'm not going to stick with auto here. The first thing I know I want to do is I want to bring out some light in the shadows. Now, the big question I have is, do I do a global edit where I slide the shadow slider over and see how that works there? Or do I do some sort of localized edits? And I'm definitely going to start with localized edits here. So I'm actually going to come over to my subject masking tool, and boom, like magic, it highlights the two things I really want to bring the shadows out of. And I'm just going to start bringing the shadows from the subjects. Notice how even all the way to the right, it doesn't do a whole lot. So I'm just going to go to 50 and then immediately switch over to my exposure. And obviously this does a heck of a lot more. Because I'm likely going to be doing some all frame, full frame global edits, I'm not going to overdo it, but I'm going to go up like one full stop just because, one stop of light in photo editing of a raw photo, especially at ISO 100, is not going to be too bad. So I'm going to hit E to get back to my main editor. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mess with the sky, actually. So I'm going to come over here, create a new mask, select sky. And, that sky is cool. So one quick and dirty, but oftentimes quite effective, quite dramatic way to improve these is to go to dehaze. And that's just going to almost, I say almost do like what a polarizing filter might do. And notice how that definitely darkens the sky. If we go all the way to the right, obviously far too much, but just a little bit of the sky is going to be quite nice. Now, notice that doesn't do anything to mountains. It doesn't do anything to the near ground or closer sky. It's missing part of it. So I'm not going to overdo it there because I might end up doing a dehaze global edit. So let's come back to the main editor and let's start messing with exposure across the board. Let's just see what happens. Yeah, so that obviously is going to brighten everything. It really washes out the background. So now what I'm going to do is I have to have a hard thought with myself as to whether I want this foreground to really be an accentuated part of the photo. Like, do I want it to be light? Oftentimes I will darken the near ground to just minimize the distraction. But in this case, I'm going to really come over here and probably lighten everything, to be honest. Now, since I've already lightened the two of us, I'm not going to do a lot. So I'm just going to hover over the numbers, just click up, and notice that does some really nice work there. It lightens that foreground, it lightens them, but it starts to wash out the sky. So I'm actually going to do a gradient filter of G just to do a nice treatment of the sky. I could easily select the background, which would basically highlight everything but the two subjects. But in this case, I think that that's gonna be a little bit harsh in the eyes. It's gonna start to look maybe a little bit fake. So a gradient filter really, really works well for the eyes. It makes it look very natural. And so I'm just going to boost the contrast here. I'm probably gonna come down to clarity as well and make those clouds pop a little bit. I'm going to also dehaze a little bit. Dehaze is a great thing for big distant scenes. Like that Annapurna Peak might be dozens of miles away, and there's going to be atmospheric haze. So I'm really liking how that's looking. But one final trick I have in my arsenal of skies is I will come down here to the luminance and blue luminance, and I will watch what happens when I just dial this down. It really makes the sky look dark, and I think it does the closest thing in Photoshop to what a polarizing filter might do. Okay, so that did that. It pops those clouds. Let's come back to my main editor, and gosh, it's just looking a little bit washed out. So I think I'm gonna boost shadows of everything. And that does lighten the foreground quite a bit, which again, many times I don't want to put added emphasis on parts of the photo that are not germane to what I'm trying to show. But in this case, it's like really cool rocky rubble. It helps tell the story of what we're standing on. It's a bit of the trail. It's got that nice arc down here that I think adds an aesthetic element to it. So I actually like doing that. But I do notice that the whole photo looks quite blue. So I'm gonna come over here to my color, which is my white balance, and it's on, the as shot setting, color temperature of 6,000. I'm just gonna hit auto and see what it does. Ooh, it definitely warms it up quite a bit, up to 7,500. Oftentimes when I do that, starting at 6,000 and then going to 7,500, I don't like either of them. So I'm gonna hover over this and just dial it somewhere in the middle, which would be roughly 6,800. And notice it's got the nice warm look, but it's not too cool blue. Then I'm gonna come over to my vignetting and just see what this does, because we do have a dominant subject and dominant landscape kind of towards the middle of the frame. Those fringes are not super important. And I'm just gonna not dehaze, but I'm just gonna vignette a little bit, and it's kind of cool. I don't really like it. So a trick that I have for vignetting when I don't want to just use the default vignetting tool is actually make a radio filter. So I just hit J, and radio filter allows me to put a circle. And I'm gonna put a circle around my subjects here. And I'm actually gonna bring this in a little bit on all sides. So I need to manually kind of shrink this in a little bit. And you see the red is soft because I have a lot of feathering towards the middle. I'm gonna reduce that a little bit. And okay, so we got the nice red selective coloring, and then I'm gonna hit X to inverse it. And then now I get the ability to underexpose and sort of vignette around the main subjects. And notice I'm not doing much. It's just slightly pulling the darkness from the corners in, but not in an equal sense of how normal vignetting works, like the slider vignetting that I would have in the main editing panel right here that I'm sort of circling with my mouse. So I really like what that did. It provides a little bit of spotlighting on the subjects. If I wanted to really be perfectionist, I might go back in to my subject masking here, select us, and then, maybe dial down the exposure or shadows a little bit, because I almost feel like we're overly bright, a little bit of like an HDR look. So I might just dial shadows just slightly. I think that looks a little bit more realistic there. And then, this does it for me. Like, this is a good final photo. The final thing, if I wanted to, I might come over here and look at the highlights and the midtones, it's really gonna treat the color of the sky, and just experiment a little bit with what it might look like to do a bit more teal versus that sort of blue borderline violet look. So if I were to do that, I just come over here with midtones and see how that just looks a little bit almost like that antique-y photo. That's gonna be more of a photographic style for you if you want. I think it gives it a little bit more of a retro look. I probably am just gonna back off of that slightly and then try the highlights as well. That does the same thing. And then sometimes, just to show you my full kit and caboodle, my full arsenal of tricks, sometimes I will go to the exact opposite end of the color wheel to add more of like a dramatic complementary color. So going the other direction of teal, I might just pull it over to the right a little bit, and that adds a little bit of interesting warmth. Now, obviously, if I go way too far, that's not what we want to do. But if I come back to the middle and just slightly go to like a little bit of a warm kind of blue look there, and then since I'm on that, I might do the shadows as well. The shadows are really just going to do the darkest parts of the scene. Let's see what teal does. Not what I want. See what warm does. Ooh, warm actually looks kind of nice, over in this sort of yellow, orange, red end of the spectrum because it's a complement between teal and orange, the sort of teal blue sky and an orange foreground. I really like that a lot. Little aside here, little tangent. I just noticed I didn't kind of calibrate the brightness of my screen. So I'm just going to make sure I'm at my 2/3 roughly, because 2/3 brightness on a screen is really kind of the most accurate to what it's going to be like if you print it or if you show it online. And gosh, I like that a lot. Yeah, I am tempted to do a gradient filter to darken this corner, the bottom left-hand corner, but for a travel photo that's trying to seek some real accuracy, I don't think I'm going to do it. So here's our before and after. Notice that that color treatment of the teals and the blues really did a lot. I mean, I think that that made the photo right there. And yeah, there you go. Nice travel mountain scene with a couple subjects looking off in the distance. My final photo, I do like a heck of a lot better.